Welcome to Anglo-Romani with Pricey. I'm Pricey, and this is the series where I talk about the Anglo-Romani paralanguage / dialect and take a look at the etymology of particular words that I grew up with as a lens for the Romani culture in the UK more generally. You'll notice that I'm a little bit more subdued today in my tone and energy, and this is largely out of respect for my uncle who is dying today. I actually mentioned him in a previous video in this series. He's the one that is known in my family as Black John, but he is at the end of his life at the time of recording this video. And while I am not particularly close with him, I know that a lot of my family are, especially my dad. So I'm not too energetic about this video today. It's kind of a weird time to be filming, but I've always had a kind of life goes on mentality when it comes to basically anyone, including family, anyone who I haven't lived with passing. It's also in light of this, I was going to make this a bigger episode than it was going to be, kind of clear up all of the remaining verbs, and I was going to have that typical conversation that I always do in the run up to these videos where I phone my dad up and I pick his brains about a particular group of words or whatever. So I was going to do that, but this has been taking place for a little while now, as these things often do, and so I've just decided to make this about the verbs that I was able to remember myself. But with that being said, let's get on with this, looking at the first word I was going to look at today, that being Gavver. So to those who know a lot of British slang, it might be a surprise to find that Gavver actually means hide, because Gavver is one of those words that has been adopted by a lot of Gorger people to mean police. It's actually one of many. We have Rozzers, we have Gavvers, we have Mushkas. All of these words come from Romany in some form or another, and Gavver is one of them, meaning police. The actual etymology of that one is simply, it was like a Gavver mush, a hiding mush, a mush who was, I guess, hiding, like plainclothes police officer. Or maybe that they're arresting someone and so they're hiding them from the public. I'm not entirely sure which way that would go round. So a police officer came to be called a Gavver for this very reason. But otherwise, in my upbringing, Gavver always meant hide something. And it could be used as a command. If my dad said, Gavver that, it was like, keep that out of sight, or whatever. And it seems that is the case for most Romani families across the UK and across Europe, where it has come from the word Garavel, and this in turn has been inherited from the Prakrit Gadai, I want to say it's pronounced, it'd be on the screen. But yeah, a very clean cut sort of etymology, this one. Gavver goes straight back to a Prakrit word, and it has been traced fairly easily by linguists. The next word I'm looking at is lag. Lag means to urinate, but it can also be a noun for urine, and it's in this latter context that it's mostly used in its original form. In Anglo-Romani, it's been picked up as a verb, like I say, so you could say I'm lagging or he's lagging, whatever. That's kind of like saying, he's peeing, he's urinating. But in its original context, which is cant, so the kind of slang of criminals in England and in the British Isles generally, it was always a noun, it seems. So he's having a lag would be much more historically accurate, and if I'm being realistic, that is more or less 99% of the cases that I will have heard it in. I do know it as a verb, but mostly I hear it as a noun, sort of as part of a verbal phrase. And like I say, lag comes from thieves' cant, which is kind of an underground dialect language, if you want to call it that, of perhaps Tudor or medieval Britain, and according to Green's Dictionary of Slang, the earliest known written record of this is dated to 1610. Another verb that typically shows up as a different kind of word form is the word pagger. You can pagger something, it means you break it, but it's more often it's heard as, oh, that's paggered, it's broken. So pagger can be used as a verb, but mostly I hear it used as an adjective. That said, I'm including it here because when I asked my mum for particular verbs a while back, she came to me with pagger and I was like, of course. Now, of all the words I'm talking about today, pagger was the one that was the most difficult to find any kind of concrete mention of in terms of its etymology, in terms of where it came from. Yaron Matras at the Romany project at the University of Manchester, the trusted go-to source for a lot of this stuff, including 2 of his books, including basically all the sources that I've used so far, seem to relate this one to Pag, I want to say it's pronounced, but yeah, they relate it to Pag or Paggerel or Pagel from sort of continental Romany. But when I went into looking into this word, nothing was coming up for ages. And when I started looking through all the various different languages that Romany has passed through and filtered through and picked up words from, again, nothing even remotely familiar, it seemed, for a long time. But as luck would have it, through trying out various different spellings, I eventually came across the Swedish word paja. I want to say it's pronounced P-A-J-A. It's on the screen. I imagine that's how it's pronounced with my limited knowledge of Swedish. This seems to be a Swedish slang term that seems to have been picked up by something called Angloromani, which is a Norwegian equivalent that I just learned about of like Anglo-Romani. So it's kind of Norwegian with Romani inflections, or kind of like Norwegian Romani who have picked up the Norwegian language and sort of attach their words onto it. So this Swedish slang term came from a Norwegian Romani Pagger, which basically is the same word with a little extra sound in there. And this in turn was able to be linked back on Wiktionary at least to that word pag. And in turn, linguists have traced this one back to the Sanskrit banakti. So eventually I got there, but it was through yet another new line that I'll have to consider when looking into words going forward. This next word, puv, is one that I've only ever come across in one very particular place. Mandy Veld Puv de Grai down by the Parney side, which is a song that my dad would sing sometimes when he'd had a few, and it's one that I've come across in various other places. You can actually find it on the internet, funnily enough. And what this translates as is, I took the horse down to the riverside to graze. As you can see in this song, to puv de grai is to let the horse graze. And so that is definitely a verb. But in basically every other context that I was able to find this in, it seemed to mean something else entirely. And that was field in sort of Anglo-Romani and across various other Romani families. Again, not one that I have much experience hearing it as. And in continental Romani, this seems to carry on and indeed goes on to mean other things like the ground itself. So in a way, this could easily have been included in general places or in nature, but just by the quirk of how I've always heard it as a verb, it's ended up here in this particular video. Now, like I say, puv means field across most Anglo-Romani from what I can see, and across most continental Romani. It hasn't really changed much, maybe having the L suffix put on, so puvel, but otherwise it hasn't really changed. It's always meant field. Occasionally it's meant ground or dirt or earth or something along those lines, but mostly it means field. However, in its original sort of location within Sanskrit, it comes from the word bhumi, which does mean the earth itself, like not the planet Earth, but you know, dirt, ground, that kind of thing. And the last word I want to talk about today is the word kor, meaning to fight, or more specifically to hit or to beat up. And this word also appears in the song Man Die Welt Puff de Grey. In fact, in most iterations that I've come across, it's the last word of the song. And this one, again, is a very clean-cut translation back to Kuril in continental Romany, and in that in turn can be traced back all the way, of course, to Sanskrit, but further still it can be traced back to Proto-Dravidian, which is nearly as far back as I've gone. I've gone to Proto-Indo-Aryan, Proto-Indo-Iranian. This one is Proto-Dravidian, so that is kind of an ancestor language to pretty much most, if not all, Indian languages that I've come across. And so kor, the Romany word meaning to fight, specifically comes from the Proto-Dravidian kot, which is to beat. And in turn, alongside the Romany word kor, there are so many ancestors to the Proto-Dravidian word kot that are still found across the entire subcontinent of India today. So you will find words relating to this in things as far apart as Hindi, Sinhalese, Tamil, Gujarati, Bengali, etc. Like it's found across pretty much most, if not all, Indian languages. And with that, those are the rest of the verbs that I was able to remember as part of my experience growing up with the Anglo-Romani dialect. Like I say, at some point I will pick my dad's brains to see if there are any more. There are particular words that I want to ask him about, and I reckon that might bear some fruit. If not, if it's just a couple of them, it will go into some other video in the future, maybe not another verbs one. But please do let me know what you thought of any of these terms, and let me know about any other verbs that you might know from Anglo-Romani, including, you know, alternative versions of many of these words. That usually is the case. I find that people have very different experiences, so it's not quite a universal dialect across the whole UK by a long shot. Feel free to like this video, send my dad some love if you feel like it, and until next time, have a good one.